Hi everyone, this is Savannah Bekowski, Project Assistant at the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar entitled The State of Rates in North Carolina and the Water and Wastewater Rates Dashboard. To give you all of an idea of where others on the webinar are tuning in from, we have prepared this map. You can see that we have attendees spread all throughout the country. Thanks to you all for joining us today. This session is one of several webinars conducted by the Environmental Finance Center Network for the Smart Management for Small Water Systems project. The EFCN provides training and technical assistance to small public water systems in all 50 states and 5 territories to help local water systems achieve and maintain compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And here you can see the various centers that make up the Environmental Finance Center Network. You can see that we have centers spread all across the country, from New York to Kansas to California. And here you can see the areas of expertise that the EFCN focuses on. Workshops, trainings, and direct assistance are provided on asset management, energy management planning, rates and finance, leadership through decision-making and communication, managing drought, water loss reduction, collaborating with neighboring communities, multi-funding, water conservation, management and finance tools and techniques, climate change resiliency, and workforce development. The EFCN also has a small systems blog where you can learn more about the finance and management through this blog. Blog posts feature lessons learned from our trainings and technical assistance, descriptions of available tools, and small system success stories. You will have an opportunity to subscribe to the blog at the end of this webinar. And in addition to workshops, technical assistance, and webinars, as part of the Smart Management for Small Water Systems projects, we are also creating a table that lists the major funding sources for drinking water infrastructure projects for each state and territory. Here's how you can access those tables. From the homepage on the efcnnetwork.org, go to the Resources tab. You then click on Funding by State. This will take you to a map of the country. If you click on the state you are interested in, you will find a PDF table of the relevant funding sources for drinking water infrastructure in that state. The table looks like the image on the left-hand side of the slide. For each funding program, it includes the name of the program, a short description, and contact information for someone who works in the program. Now, before I turn the presentation over to our speakers for today, I do have 2 quick polling questions for you. The first polling question is, what kind of water utility do you represent? Please select from one of the following answers: a for-profit water utility, a local government, either a municipality or county, a non-for-profit, cooperative, or association utility, or another water utility such as an authority, district, or school, or you're not from a drinking water utility. And about 5 seconds left to input your answers. Getting ready to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. It looks like a majority of us are from a local government utility or from a non-water drinking utility. And the next quick polling question I have is, what size water system does your utility operate by number of people served? Please select from one of the following: very small, small, medium, large or very large, or a non-drinking water utility. And about 5 seconds left to input your answers. Getting ready to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. The majority of attendees on the call today are from a large or very large water system. At this point, I would like to turn the presentation over to our speakers for today. For today's session, we have Shadi Eskoff, Senior Project Director of the Environmental Finance Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We also have Chris Nida, Director of Research and Policy Analysis of the North Carolina League of Municipalities. Shadi and Chris, welcome and take it away.
Thank you very much, Savannah. This is Chris Nida with the League of Municipalities, and I'm very happy to be with everybody joining us today. I appreciate you tearing yourself away from the first round of the NCAA tournament, or at least turning down the volume on your phone or tablet while we make this presentation this afternoon. Again, I'd like to thank Savannah for arranging all the logistics of everything, and thanks Shadi and the Environmental Finance Center for all their partnership over the years. You know, we were chatting briefly before the webinar started We've been collaborating on this water and wastewater rates survey since 2005. I've been at the league since 2008, so certainly during my whole time here and going back even beyond that, we have worked together on this survey. It's one of the surveys that we do as a league that I get asked the most questions about, or maybe brought up to me the most in terms of how helpful and useful it is for our members, and that's really really great feedback, and we're glad to hear that this is such a useful tool for so many of you. I hope that's true for many of you on the call today. And I really just want to thank Shadi and the Environmental Finance Center for all their partnership. They've carried a lot of the load in terms of data crunching and putting the reports together and the dashboard that you'll see later, and we really appreciate their partnership and all the service they provide for our municipal members around the state. Our 2017 survey, which I know Shadi will be talking about some of the results of today, we had 441 utilities participate, which is a great number. About 85% of utilities all around the state chose to participate in the survey this year, which again is great. The more, the better, the more useful tool it is. It's free online information. We put together tables, a summary report, the rates dashboard, of course, which I hope many of you use and we'll learn more about later, and have rate sheets available that you can get through either linking through our website, nclm.org, or going straight to www.efc.sog.unc.edu. Again, I really appreciate everybody taking the time to join us today. It's an important time, as it always is, but maybe especially so this year for water and wastewater utility financing issues. You know, I think many of you know that I'm on the government affairs team here at the league, and there are always utility issues that come up in the bills through the legislature, and that's true this year again, where there's discussions about some pretty significant utility financing issues going on, probably as we speak. Maybe we can get together in the question session and talk about those. You can always follow up with me individually. My contact information is in the presentation, obviously. But I'm digressing a little bit. That's really all I have to say. Again, I just want to thank everybody for being here. Thanks Shadi and Savannah for their work. And at this point, I will turn it over to Shadi to talk more about the survey and the results of what we've done here in 2017.
Thank you very much, Chris, and thank you, Savannah. This is Shadi Eskaf with the Environmental Finance Center here at UNC School of Government. And I just want to echo what Chris was saying. We really appreciate the collaboration between us. I'm not sure if everybody on this call realizes that even though we've been doing this survey together with the League since 2005, the League had been doing a survey, I think it was every 2 years before that, going back as far as 1980s, I believe. I know we have some rates for some of the municipalities in North Carolina that dated 1987. Thanks to the League's leadership for doing the survey and getting the work started. As part of the collaboration, what we do with the rate surveys, that we expanded the scope of it. Instead of just looking at only municipalities, we started including all other types of units of government, which means counties are included, districts are included, authorities, metropolitan districts, sanitary districts. Some nonprofits, water associations are included in the survey. As far as we try to get at least the largest ones, and also some of the for-profit utilities that are regulated by Utilities Commission, like Aqua North Carolina and Carolina Water Service. So the survey encompasses all sorts of utilities, and like Chris said, we have 441 utilities, which is about 85% of all of the water, wastewater utilities that serve communities that we could identify in the state. The survey includes water rates, wastewater rates, and also residential irrigation rates. We look at rates for residential customers as well as commercial or non-residential customers. We look for rates that are for inside city customers and outside city customers. And the survey, the table that we produce, has information about rates or how much utilities are charging at different levels of consumption. So it's not just, you know, how much are you charging on average? It's also how much are you charging it for 0 gallons of use? How much are you charging for 15,000 gallons of use? How much are you charging commercial customers at 200,000 or 250,000 gallons? So you have a lot of data that's available to you from the combination of products that we produce out of the survey. So the dashboard we'll be talking about a lot today in this webinar, but I also wanted to kind of point out that the rates tables as well as the rates report go hand in hand with the dashboard and provide even more information than you might get from just the dashboard. I'll be showing slides later on with links to all of these resources. Actually, a portion of this webinar is going to be talking about all sorts of resources available to you. But I wanted to kind of point that out from the outset. All right, so the objectives for today's webinar, we have threefold. I'm kind of looking at this from a big picture first. We want to provide you a context of what the current state of rates are. So what are utilities in North Carolina currently charging? How much are they charging? Are they raising rates? Who's raising rates? How much are they raising rates by? Different practices when it comes to rate setting, what kind of rate structures are more prevalent than others. So this big picture really is there to serve, to provide you just some context so that you're aware of how your utility kind of fits in this entire, the context of rate setting in the state of North Carolina. And it's important to know, generally speaking, if the vast majority of utilities are doing something that's completely different than you might want to look into your practices and see if you're up to date with the current best practices or just kind of prevalent practices. So we'll start off by looking at a big picture. What are the state of rates and rate structures in North Carolina, and as well as financial performance metrics that we get from your audited statements. Then we'll zoom into, or we'll do a little bit of a narrow focus. We'll focus on one utility at a time. So how can you use the rates dashboards to evaluate your rates, compare your rates, to be able to benchmark your financial performance, look at measurements of affordability of your rates. What happens if you raise your rates? Are your customers going to be able to afford increases of rates? So it changes the perspective from an entire state to you, to the person who's sitting there. Right now it's budget season, so as you're thinking about setting rates for next year, you want to compare your information or look at your own data and kind of do a comparison between you and others in the state. So the dashboard is a tool to serve you there. And then we'll finally end with what I'm calling the unknown, which is we'll share some of the resources, like I said, that are available for you during budget season. But then we'll open it up to questions. And it's the unknown really from Chris and my perspective, because we're not sure what kind of questions you have. So if you look at your panel, the GoToWebinar panel, there's a section there where you can submit questions. We encourage you to submit questions at any time. If you have a question right now that's on your mind, please put it in there. Savannah is going to be collecting those questions over time, and then she's going to be saving them all for the end. And she will read the questions, and Chris and I will take some time to answer them. And if we don't answer all of your questions at the end, then Savannah will be sending us all the leftover questions, and we will be following up with you directly by email or phone calls. So please submit your questions. We're not going to do an hour and a half of just presentation. We do want to have at least 15, 20 minutes of answering questions. And thank you to everybody who submitted questions already when you registered. We collected all those questions. I looked at them yesterday. And a lot of the questions that you were asking, we already have some slides in here to answer some of your questions. There are other questions that you've asked while you were registering that we might not touch on directly directly during the presentation mode, but we'll try to address during the Q&A session. So if we don't answer your question right away, please feel free to put it back into the queue, and we can talk about it. All right, so let's talk about the big picture, the state of rates and finances in North Carolina. And for this, what we've done is, in addition to the league and to our survey with the league, where we have 441 utilities, those 441 utilities have 483 rate structures. So some utilities have multiple rate structures that serve, some that serve specific service areas. I'm not talking about inside outside. I'm talking about I can give examples, but I think like Raleigh, for example, has a couple of utilities that they have taken over. So in communities of those utilities, they have a different rate structure. There are other types of, there are some counties that have districts within the counties and have different rates for those districts. There are some utilities that have service areas that say, if you're in this section of the county or this section of the town, we'll charge you these rates. If you're somewhere else, we'll charge you different rates. So 483 rate structures coming out of 441 utilities. And we combined all that information, all the rates data that we talked about earlier, with the audited financial statement data from fiscal year 2016 that had been compiled by the Local Government Commission in the State Treasurer's Office. And this, what I'm going to be showing today, are data that were compiled as of the beginning of February, or maybe in the middle of February. So not every utility had, or every local government had submitted their financial statements to the Local Government Commission by that time, and or the data were not just compiled into their database. So we know that we're missing a few utilities, and if you go on the dashboard and you look at your financial benchmarks and it's missing, it might be that the data was just not compiled yet by the Local Government Commission. We will be updating the dashboard again later on, probably in April, so that we have a more comprehensive look at all the financial data. We also add the socioeconomic data for your communities based on the Census Bureau. So we look at the median household income, the poverty levels in your community, and so on. And then we also look at the water system characteristics from the CIDWIS database from EPA, which includes estimates for your service population and the number of accounts and the type of water water system or water source that you use, whether it's surface water, groundwater, or if you're a purchase system. All right, so let's get into the numbers. And everything that you see here, a lot of these graphs are published in this report that I mentioned. Right now we have the data tables posted online. I'll be showing you where you can find those. The report is not yet posted. My colleague is finishing up some formatting and some edits right now, but we're hoping to have that report ready by the beginning of next week. So just to give you a big picture of what we look like as a state. North Carolina local government utilities, just the local government utilities, collected about $2.7 billion in water and wastewater operating revenues in the last fiscal year. And that's not including those like 80 or so municipalities and local governments that have not yet submitted their financial statements to the Local Government Commission. So those missing utilities are typically smaller utilities. So my guess is that $2.7 billion might creep up to 2.8 to 2.9. But the vast majority of all the large ones are included. So as a state, local governments are collecting nearly $3 billion in water and wastewater revenue. And that number has been growing over time. Every time we look at this number, it's been going up a little bit. It wasn't long ago, I think maybe 5 years ago, it was a 2 billion mark, and before that it was closer to the 1.5. Every year, utilities seem to be raising rates, and people are paying more and more for services. And it's your duty, of course, to be able to set the appropriate rates to make sure that you have enough revenues to cover all of your expenses, but also to charge your customers fairly and equitably. From that $2.7 billion, Charlotte, for example, Charlotte Water was the largest system, of course, and they collect about $377 million in water and wastewater revenues in fiscal year 2016. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have a few, maybe 5 to 10 utilities that, or local governments, that collect as little as $19,000 for their water waste or wastewater system. So this is a town of Proctorville. They only have a wastewater system. The water is provided by a different utility. And their wastewater system serves about 60 customers, 60 households or so. And they're charging, I think they don't even have meters, and they're not using the other utilities' meter information to charge by meter. They're charging a flat fee for all the households, and they're collecting about $19,000. The town of Proctorville, as well as all the other small towns that have this level of revenue generation, have the same kind of questions and the same kind of responsibilities that Charlotte Water has when it comes to charging rates and making sure that the rates are sufficient for the utilities' needs and are fair for the customers' needs. And there are a lot of things that small towns have to deal with, capital the cost of capital is usually a very significant portion of their budget, it becomes much harder for small towns to be able to pay for infrastructure when they're only collecting $19,000 a year, as opposed to utilities like Raleigh and Charlotte, where they can take on a lot of debt and have some revenues to be able to pay that back. So I'm going to pause here and ask another polling question. I'll ask Savannah to post a question. And that polling question is going to ask you if you're satisfied with your current rates. Whether you're not at all satisfied, you think that your rates need an overhaul, not very satisfied, they need a lot of work, somewhat satisfied, you're okay with most of it, you might need some small tweaks here and there, or you're very satisfied, you don't think any changes are needed.
Thank you, Shadi, and we'll leave the poll open for about another 5 seconds to input your answer. And getting ready to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. So Shadi, I'm not sure if you can see these results, but it looks like 68% of the attendees say they're somewhat satisfied with their rates. 23% say that they're very satisfied with no changes needed. 6% say not very satisfied, and 2% say not at all.
Okay, thank you. No, I don't see the survey, the poll results, so I appreciate you reading them out. Well, that's overall good news. 68% or nearly more than 90% of you had said you're either somewhat or you're very satisfied with your rates. So that's great, and maybe some of you are here to kind of just see where things are as a state and see how you compare as a utility. The not at all and the not very satisfied, I'll let you know, and I'll mention this again later on today, we can provide free advising to communities to look at rates. So if you think you need an overhaul of your rates, or if you're just not very satisfied, you think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and you're looking for some help, there'll be an opportunity towards the end of this webinar to indicate that, and we can follow up with a phone call and we can talk about rate setting in general. So thank you very much. Well, so the vast majority of you said that you're satisfied with your rates. Over 90% said you're satisfied with rates. Looking at how rates did last year in fiscal year 2016, less than 90% of utilities did well as far as revenue generation. So what I'm showing here is a map of 386 local governments, and the red squares are utilities that had operating revenues that were less than operations and maintenance costs. And that does not include anything with debt service, does not include anything with future capital costs or putting money into reserves. Just O&M costs exceeded the amount of operating revenues that they collected in a given year. And that's about 10% of the utilities. Another 10% had enough revenues coming in to pay for operations and maintenance, but not operations, maintenance, and debt service as well. Of course, anybody here who's got debt, you know that your funders are always checking, making sure that you have a very good debt service coverage ratio. And if you're not generating enough revenues to pay for O&M expenses and debt service, it raises red flags. 81% were in that comfortable zone where your revenues in fiscal year 16 were higher than O&M and debt service. That doesn't say that every one of those 81% of the utilities had enough revenues coming in to also pay for future capital costs. We can't tell that. The financial data can only look backwards. So there's a portion within that 81% that might still not have enough revenues coming in from their current rate. So the big picture is there are some utilities that are struggling, and we'll dig deeper, a little bit deeper into who exactly, who's in that red square area. But there are some utilities that are struggling with generating enough revenues to be able to pay for their expenses. And we've got USDA, Division of Water Infrastructure, SWIA, and other funding programs available to help communities pay for capital costs through subsidized funding to be able to give them a break and be able to make sure that utilities are still investing in their infrastructure. Because the last thing that the state wants to see, or anybody wants to see, or communities want to see, are utilities are not charging enough and are constantly pushing back reinvestment into their system, and eventually the system starts breaking down and you start endangering public health. The problems seem to come really from the smaller utilities, which is not a surprise to a lot of you. From the utilities that charge more than 10,000 or have more than 10,000 people, none of them were in that red square. So everybody had enough revenues, and almost all of them, 96% of them, had enough revenues to pay for debt service as well as O&M expenditures. But the small systems, those that are serving fewer than 1,000 people, so that's fewer than 500 households really. Those systems, about a quarter of them, a little more than a quarter of them, did not have enough revenues coming in to be able to pay for their O&M and debt service. So this is primarily a small system problem, and a lot of it, of course, because of how many customers you're charging, or the customer base is not large enough to be able to generate a lot of revenues. And you'll see in another slide that some of these utilities actually charge some of the highest rates in the state. We do have an environmental finance blog where we look at some of these numbers in more detail. One question that we asked recently, I think maybe a couple of weeks ago, was if you're the utility, if you're in this red square area or even the orange diamond, so your revenues are not enough to pay for O&M expenses and debt service, are you raising rates? I mean, you would think that after 3 years of falling behind on revenues that you would eventually raise rates. And what we found from the numbers from North Carolina, you can look at the blog post for more information. The answer is some of those utilities are doing a little bit better than other utilities as far as raising rates, but not everybody is. And a lot of that might be because some of them are charging higher rates to begin with. So they're charging high rates and they're not generating enough revenues to pay for all their expenses. So that's a different kind of issue than a utility that just really has low rates to begin with and has not raised rates in several years. So this graph right here shows you all the different utilities in fiscal year 2016, looking at rates on the x-axis and looking at the ratio of revenues over expenses on the y-axis. Anything above the red line is a good thing. Your revenues were more than expenses. Anything below the red line is your expenses exceeded revenues. And you can see that it's all over the place. There is no obvious trend line here. It's not that utilities that have higher rates do better in general. It slightly trends that way, but it's not a very significant trend. If you look at this section down here, these are utilities that charge some of the highest rates in the state, but are still not covering enough or not generating enough revenue to pay for all their expenses. If you are one of these utilities, again, please feel free to contact us and we can try to provide some assistance. So let's look at what utilities are charging right now, and looking at the rates that are currently in effect, or at least were in effect as of January 2017. So these are, we hope, the most current rates that we could survey. And looking at all the utilities, the 441 utilities, half of the utilities are charging customers more than $70.65 for combined water and sewer service per month. On the water side, including water-only utilities, half the utilities are charging more than $32 a month, and half are charging more than $40 a month for wastewater. Wastewater rates are typically higher than water rates. And this is just looking at inside residential customers using 5,000 gallons a month, which is close to a statewide average on what the consumption is. So, I can always stop here and ask, $70 a month, is that high, is that low? It really depends on how you interpret this number, and it's hard to get an idea of what that number means because it's an abstract. $70, some of you might be able to compare it quickly to some of your household expenses. Here's one way to look at it. If you go to the grocery store, and this is from Harris Teeter, I just pulled up these items from Harris Teeter's website and looked at the prices on Harris Teeter. If you purchase these items right there, that is a month's worth of water and wastewater service for half of these utilities. So lettuce, eggs, milk, salmon, tissue paper or toilet paper, laundry detergents, pimento cheese, because we're in North Carolina, of course. So when you're communicating to customers, and even when you're communicating to your boards and councils, talking about that you're charging $70 a month for average consumption might sound high or might sound low. It depends on how the person receives it. But talking about what that number means in terms of something that's tangible and something that people can quickly understand. I know by looking at this graph or the slide, that is not my entire week's worth of groceries. I spend more than that going to the grocery store. And for that amount of money, for that $70, I am getting clean drinking water at the turn of a tap, 24 hours a day. I have fire protection, and I can drink water that I can trust and not get sick. And I also have somewhere to just flush my wastewater. So you are providing great service to the state and great value. You're providing great value to the customer, but the question of how do you communicate the value of water and wastewater service to customers and to the boards has always been a tricky one, and this is just one way, one of many different ways where you can communicate those numbers. So I encourage you, when you're talking to your boards, to your customers, to think of different ways of communicating what the average bill might mean to them. I'm going to stop here and ask another polling question. Savannah, if you don't mind putting that up, please. And this question is, what's your anticipated rate increase request for next year? So we're at the beginning of the budget season right now. You might be still looking at it. If you're not sure, that's fine. Just kind of guess sort of intuitively like where you think you might end up. Are you thinking of having any rate increase requests for the coming fiscal year? Is it somewhere between 1% and 3%, 3 to 6%, 6 to 9, or 6 to 10, or anything more than 10%? Just to get an idea of where you all are thinking in terms of how much you might be going in for. And we're not holding you to these words or to this polling results. If you end up asking for something else, of course, that's as expected.
All right, and about 5 more seconds to input your answer. Getting ready to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And Shadi, we have an equal tie of 38% between no change or 1 to 3% change. We have 50% of attendees that are in between a 3 to 5.9% change, 6% between a 6 and 9.9% change, and 2% of 10% or more.
All right, thank you. So that's actually kind of in line with what we have seen recently as far as rate increases. There's usually a significant portion, but not a majority, that don't want to change rates or they think that the rates are sufficient for next year. And then lately, rate increases have been in that low range of 1 to 3, maybe it's actually more like 2 to 5% range. And I'll show you some of these slides to do these comparisons. So in general, in North Carolina, thank you, Savannah. In general, North Carolina, rate increases are very common. About 60% of the rate structures that we've seen in the survey had raised rates or had changed rates in the past 2 years. And only 16% of rate structures have not changed rates since 2012, which is 5 years ago. So we have heard from communities that say that their boards take pride in not raising rates, and they like to know that they have not raised rates in 5 to 10 years. We show them this slide and say, you're in a very, very small minority. Some of these utilities might not need to raise rates for 5 to 10 years. That's great. But those utilities that do need to raise rates in order to be able to provide service, it's important for them to be able to raise rates. And you can see that 60% of utilities in North Carolina have raised rates within the past couple of years. So it's a very common thing to do in this state. In the last year alone, 44% of water rates in 44% of rate structures have increased, and 46%, so nearly half of the rate structures that we looked at saw an increase in the last year, which is a little bit higher than what your 38% today said that you're thinking of not raising rates next year. So half the utilities seem to be raising rates, and that's pretty consistent from year to year when we look at the numbers. When it comes to the actual rate increase, for those utilities that did raise rates, half of the rate increases were more than 4.1% for water and more than 4.9% for wastewater. So that's the median right there. Half the utilities raised rates more than 4% for water and 5% for sewer, and the other half raised rates by a little bit less than that. And again, that's about at the 5,000 gallons per month consumption. So most rate increases, if you look at the bar graph, most rate increases were less than $3 per month. You can see that from this left bar graph right here. Vast majority were that bill for 5,000 gallons only went up by $1, $2, or $3 a month. And that's somewhere between 2 to 6% range of where the rates were in the previous year. And again, the medians were about $1.3 per month for water and $1.8 per month for wastewater. So half the utilities raised more than that, half raised less than that. Looking at just a sample of 173 utilities that have given us the rate information every single year since, I think, 2006, so the past 11 years, we've seen that their rate increases have slowed down significantly. So before or up to 2011, rate increases range anywhere between 4% to about 12% or even more than that in some years. And that's just the middle 50% of this 173. So there's another quarter of these utilities that were charging even higher or raise rates higher than that 16% or higher than that 13%. So there's a wide range right here of rate increases. But then after 2011, things have slowed down quite a bit. And part of it is the effects of the recession. Part of it is the effects of the drought. So when we had that drought in 2008, 2009, consumption dropped significantly, and a lot of utilities had to raise rates quickly and significantly to be able to recover that. And what they've seen is that consumption has kind of steadied after that decline, after the drought of 2008, 2009. And so the rate increases have stabilized since then. So we've seen since 2012, the rate increases for these utilities range somewhere between 3 to 7%, and the median are somewhere between 4 and 5%. So now let's talk about the actual dollars and cents that utilities are charging, and focusing on the residential customer for inside city limits at this point, or inside customers if you're not a city or municipal utility. Utilities typically charge a base charge, or some utilities call them a minimum charge. It's the dollar, how much you charge for zero consumption. It's an active account, but nobody's using any water in that house, and you're charging them a specific base charge. So in this case, in North Carolina, half the utilities were charging $15.50 or more than $15.50 for water per month, and more than $16.80 per month for wastewater as the base charge. If you have a combined water and wastewater system, half the utilities were charging more than a combined $31.52. That ranges all over the place, as you can see from the bar chart. There are some utilities that are charging anywhere between $1 to $5 per month for each service, and some utilities that are charging more than $35 a month for either water or for wastewater. If you look at the spectrum, Town of Cary was charging $3.07 per month as a base charge for water. Spring Hope was charging $1.75 per month for wastewater. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got places, specific rate structures in specific sections of Stokes County and Franklinville that are charging $42 a month for water. There are some other places that charge a little bit more than that. And then Oak Island was charging $79.25 per month for zero consumption for wastewater. And that's in addition to the volumetric charges. So you've got this wide range. And the higher that you charge for the base charge, the more that you put into that base charge, the more revenue stability the utility gets, because regardless of how much water that customer uses or how much wastewater they flush, they will end up paying this amount every single month. So that generates a lot of revenue stability for the utility. But on the other side, you also have to consider the affordability question too. So a customer who's only using 1,000, 2,000 gallons a month is still paying a very significant base charge every single month, and they're not seeing their bill, they're not able to reduce their bill by using less water. So there may be an affordability issue if everybody has to pay at least $42 and at least $79 a month. Affordability becomes a bigger concern for a larger portion of the customers. So it's a balance between affordability and revenue stability. With the base charge, you have consumption allowance. About half of the utilities in North Carolina include a consumption allowance. So that means that you're charging $20 a month and it includes the first 2,000 gallons. So you don't charge any volumetric rates for that first 2,000. Half the utilities include a consumption allowance, the other half do not. What we normally see is that the larger utilities typically don't include a consumption allowance. They charge volumetric rates starting from 0 or starting from the first gallon. And mostly the smaller communities that have larger base charges do include a consumption allowance. And the consumption allowance, most of them were about 2,000 gallons a month. On the volumetric side, what we see is that more than half of the customers, when you're looking at the service population, more than half of the customers are receiving a bill that is designed under an increasing block rate structure or a tiered rate structure. More than half the utilities charge uniform rates for water. Uniform means they might be charging $3 per 1,000 gallons regardless of how much volume you use. It's always going to be $3 per 1,000 gallons. More than half utilities like that simplicity of the rate structure, but when it comes to a number of customers, the larger utilities typically favor the increasing block rates. On the wastewater side, vast majority are charging uniform rates. So the most common combination is an increasing block rate structure from a customer perspective, increasing block water rates, and a uniform rate for wastewater. And there are still a few utilities that are charging decreasing blocks for residential water consumption. For those utilities, they would not be eligible for state subsidized funding through the Division of Water Infrastructure. So if they are looking to receive some funds, they would have to change their rate structure to either uniform, increasing block, or something else. And the other might include things like seasonal rates or a block rate structure that increases and then decreases. There are different types of rate structures in North Carolina. You guys are very creative with the rate structures, you have to say. When it comes to tiered rate structures, we often get the question of how many tiers should we have? That really depends on the utility. There is no real good rule of thumb, but here's a bar chart that shows you that most utilities that have a tiered water rate structure typically have 4 blocks or fewer. And 4 blocks means even that includes the final block as well. So you have 3 breakpoints, and then the 4th block is everything that's above that last break. So 4 block rates, 4 blocks seems to be common. 3 and 2. Anything above 4 seems to be in the minority. The first block typically ends under 6,000 gallons a month. It's usually lower for water than it's for sewer if you have it for sewer, but again, most utilities have uniform rates for wastewater. So all these graphs, again, are part of that report that will be posted at the beginning of the week, so you don't have to take screenshots of these slides. At 5,000 gallons a month, how much are customers charging for the next 1,000? So what's the actual rate that you set? When you put it on the rate sheet and you say, I'm going to be charging $3.15 per 1,000 gallons between consumptions X and Y. We looked at, at 5,000 gallons, how much are you charging for that next 1,000 gallons? And what we see in North Carolina right now is that half the utilities are charging more than $4.72 per 1,000 gallons at the water side, and more than $5.79 per 1,000 gallons at the wastewater side, at near the average consumption. So half the utilities are charging more than half the utilities are charging less. Again, that's for the inside customers. And you can see it's spread all over the place. Again, the water rates seem to be lower than the wastewater rates. Wastewater rates, these orange bars, are skewed more to the right, and there are many more utilities charging more than $10 per 1,000 gallons for the wastewater service. But on the water side, it's usually somewhere between $3 and $6 per 1,000 gallons that they're charging. Looking at affordability of rates, we compared the bill for 5,000 gallons relative to the median household income for the community. And that's one way to assess affordability, is to look at your community's median household income, which is, if you look at the Census Bureau, it will tell you what that number is. It signifies that half of the customers, half of the people living in your town, half of the households, sorry, living in your town are making less than or more than that median household income. So just as a point of reference, the state of North Carolina's median household income is $46,868 in 2015. So that means that half of the households in North Carolina made more than $46,868 a year, and the other half made less than that. In some communities, that median household income might be in the 20s. In other communities, median household income could be in the 60s and 70s. So it does range quite a bit. And looking at the rates and dividing it by the median household income, we see that it's, again, a spread. And about half of the utilities are charging more than 2.7% of median household income for combined water and wastewater service. So more than 1% for water and more than 1.3% for wastewater. In North Carolina, charging for municipal utilities, charging rates for people who live outside the city limits is relatively common. So 83% of the North Carolina municipal utilities are charging different rates, and by different, usually it means higher rates for people living outside city limits than people who are living inside city limits. The other 17% don't differentiate. The same rates apply to inside customers as well as outside customers. The chart on the left shows you kind of what that difference is between the outside rates and the inside rates. You'll see that there's a portion that has no difference. This does not include, this includes the non-municipal systems as well. So that's why it looks like a high number, because it includes that 70% of municipalities plus all of the counties and all of the authorities and all these other utilities that don't do an inside-outside differential. But those that do have differences, there's a significant portion that just charge exactly double. Anybody who's outside the city limits are charged double the inside rates. A larger number than that are charging somewhere between 101% and double. So less than double, but more than inside rates. And very, very few utilities are charging more than double rates outside city limits. There are some that charge about triple rates, but that's in a very small minority. For municipalities that do charge different rates for outside city customers, half of these municipalities are charging 1.9% or 1.9 times more for outside city customers than inside for the water, and more than 1.94 for wastewater for outside customers than they do inside customers. So it just gives you an idea of what differences between inside and outside rates are. And utilities are able to charge different rates for different services as well. So we found that 31% of the rate structures that we looked at had a very unique rate structure for commercial customers or non-residential customers. So they differentiate between residential rates, and they show different prices than they do for non-residential rates or commercial rates. So a third of the utilities have that differentiation, which makes it a little bit easier to charge more equitably. If you have a diverse customer base, and you have a lot of residential customers, but you have also a significant commercial customer base, by having different residential, non-residential rate structure, you're able to charge different prices for different types of customers. And you can charge them based on how much they are costing you as a utility. On the residential irrigation side, 16% of the utilities seem to be charging different rates for water that goes through residential irrigation meters than they do through the domestic, just the standard household meter. So that's a different way to charge, and the difference here is that water that goes through the residential irrigation meter is being applied. You can pretty much guarantee, almost guarantee, that the water is being applied outdoors. It's going to be for irrigating lawns, it's going to be for washing cars, and those type of services are highly seasonal, highly peaking, and they drive costs up significantly for utilities, but they also don't provide wastewater to the utility. So you charge them higher water rates and don't charge them wastewater rates in order to charge them fairly. Okay, so I went over a big picture. Now I'm going to talk about how to use the dashboard to look at your rates and to compare your financial performance and your rate structures. Before we do that, I have a couple more questions. This polling question is, what's the biggest challenge that you see in setting rates in your utility? Is it difficult to make projections, whether it's projections of water use because demand seems to be fluctuating, or projections of what your costs might be? So it's just difficult to look into the future and project what those costs and usage, water use looks like. Is it because the governing board is unwilling to raise rates? Is it the community's ability to pay more? You're already charging high rates and you don't think that your community can take any more rate increases? Is there a pressure to keep rates comparable to other utilities, neighboring utilities? Or is it the rising cost of other services and other governmental taxes and fees? It doesn't affect your water system, but because taxes and fees are going up for other services, you're finding it difficult to also get an increase on the water and wastewater rate side. So you just select the one biggest challenge.
So we'll leave this poll open for just about 10 more seconds since it's a little bit more in depth. 5 seconds left to input your answer. And getting ready to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. So Shadi, at 34%, attendees say the community's ability to pay more is the biggest challenge. At 32%, it is followed by the governing board's unwillingness to raise the rates. And then we go to 15% at pressure to keep rates comparable to other utilities. And then it's a tie at 10% for difficulty with making projections and rising cost of other governmental taxes and fees.
Okay, thank you. So by and large, it's the ability for communities to pay more and governance boards' unwillingness to raise rates. And I will be talking a little bit later on today about some tools and resources available to help communicate the rate case and how you can use the dashboard as well to make that case. The dashboard also helps you assess what the affordability of your rates are, and if you do raise rates, how does that affect the affordability picture? So I'll make sure that we cover those 2 points in the presentation as well, so thank you.
Shadi, I'm sorry, Shadi, your screen is just stuck on the polling question, so I'm just going to quickly switch to make me a presenter, and then I'm sending it right back to you.
Okay. While we're doing that, we will have another polling question, and this one is about, hopefully you can select more than one. The question is, what utility rates topics are you most concerned about? Is it cost recovery? Is it affordability? Is it conservation and making sure that your rates are encouraging conservation? Is it comparability of your rates? Or is it communicating with the board or even with your customers as far as what your rates are and if they need to go up? So select as many as you want. I hope that's the way that it's set up. If not, please select the one that's the most important thing for you. And the dashboard can address all these different topics, and the reason I'm asking is so it helps me figure out how much time to spend on each of these. Okay, thank you.
And we'll leave this polling question open for about another 10 seconds. About 5 seconds left. And getting ready to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. So we have a tie, a close tie at 68% with affordability, 66% at cost recovery, 27% at comparability, 30% at board communication, and 9% at conservation.
Okay, thank you very much. Is the slide progressing?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to talk about the rates dashboard, and we asked when you were registering for this webinar whether you're familiar with the dashboard or not. About a quarter of you said you were very familiar with it, and the other 3/4 either said you've seen it, you have some questions or you've never seen it before and this is your first time. So I will be talking about the dashboard in some depth to introduce it. I'm going to be assuming that you haven't seen it or used it very much. So I'll be explaining how to use the dashboard. A couple of things before we get to the dashboard itself. It's available on our website. If you just Google North Carolina Water and Wastewater Rates Dashboard, it should show up as one of the first search results. It's a tool that's available, it's free, it's open to the public. It's designed with you in mind, the utility directors and finance directors, more so than anybody else in mind, but it is available for anybody to use. It's not behind a firewall or anything like that, but it's designed to help you look at and assess your own rates and financial performance and communicate with the board. So some utilities we know have used the dashboard and presented to the board the picture of their current rates and their past financial performance before they make the case for a rate increase. The tool can help you compare rates across different utilities. It helps you assess recent financial performance of the water and sewer funds. It helps you evaluate the affordability rates and helps measure the strength of your price conservation price signal. Because that one was not highly scored in the last poll question, I probably won't be talking very much about that, but the other three things I'll make sure to mention. When I say you can compare utilities, you can compare your rates to other utilities that are similar to you in size, similar to you in the type of rate structure that you're charging. So compare me to everybody else who has an increasing block rate structure. You can compare your rates to those to utilities within a specific location that's close to you, whether it's a watershed or within a 50-mile radius. You can compare to utilities that have the same kind of demographics. So compare me with all the utilities that serve communities that have the same median household income range that we're in, or that have the same type of water. If you're a surface water system, it doesn't make any sense for you to compare your rates to water systems that have groundwater because you have a lot more treatment that you have to do, so you have a lot higher costs. If you're a purchase system, you have even higher costs than both surface water and groundwater. So compare yourself to similar type utilities when it comes to water source. And then also with financials, so utilities are based, that generate the same amount of revenue that you do. You can find the dashboard, like I mentioned, by just Googling North Carolina Water and Wastewater Rates Dashboards. You can put in EFC if you want to help bring it up even faster, or you can just go to our website and search there for North Carolina Rates Dashboard. If you do download the PowerPoint slide deck later on, this is going to be a direct link to the page. So I'm going to exit out of this and show you from our website how to navigate and to get to the dashboard. So this is our homepage. If you just go to efc.sog.unc.edu, and from here you can either navigate through programs, drinking water, or you can just search for North Carolina Water and Wastewater Rates Dashboard, and it should pop up as the first thing. Click on that and it takes you to this page that has the dashboard. The dashboard has been updated today, actually just a couple of hours ago. So if you've been using this dashboard in the past few days, you were using dashboard that was showing 2016 rates. Today we're launching the 2017 rates. So this dashboard now has current rates. Everybody's rates as of January 2017. So from here, you can read about it. You can view a webinar, record a webinar. Actually, this recorded webinar will be posted on this webpage to replace this one right here. So you'll see how to, you can come back to this, or you can share this video with other people who have not been able to register and watch this webinar. But if you click on this link up here, or you click on the image, it should open up the dashboard for you. It will start off with Aberdeen, but you can go in here and select your own utility. So while I'm talking, I'm going to be demonstrating here just a generic utility, but please go ahead and in the question box, if you want to volunteer to show your utility right now during the webinar, I'll pull up your utility and talk about how your revenues compare, how your rates compare, and we can do the assessment for you right now during this webinar. So if you, please feel free to just nominate and let us know which utility you represent. But for now, I'm just going to show the example utility and talk about the tool in general. So the first page right here shows the rates comparison. hopefully the first thing that you notice are 4 dials and a map. The map shows the dots that shows all the different rate structures that are being compared. So right now we are comparing water bills at 5,000 gallons a month, and you can change that to any consumption point from 0 gallons a month to 15,000 gallons a month. The dashboard only shows residential rates. So again, I mentioned earlier that the tables show commercial rates and non-residential rates. The dashboard will show you just the residential. So you can slide that to what your average consumption is. Let's say that this example, the average consumption was 5,000 gallons. So we'll go with that. The water bill at 5,000 gallons is $26.18. If you have bi-monthly charging or quarterly charging, we've already accounted for all that, and we're showing you the monthly equivalent portion. This map shows you all the utilities that you're comparing to right now. And if we select so if you're actually on an actual utility, you can see this pop-up comes up, select comparison group pop-up, and you can say, I want to compare against all utilities in the database, or I just want to compare against utilities in my watershed. Or you can say, I want to compare against utilities that have within 50 miles distance, or that have the same number of accounts, so by system size. We've already programmed the dashboard to know for Aberdeen what their system size is, and also identify all the other utilities in the database that has the same or similar range of customers. So it filters the data and it shows you, again, it compares you to your peer utilities. This is a much better way to do rate comparisons than to just kind of call up the 5 nearest utilities, or to call, to hand pick 5 or 10 utilities across the state and compare your rates, because at least this way you know that you're comparing against a significant number of utilities that have similar characteristics to you. And it's not based on, if you're the town of Cary and you're comparing against Aberdeen, that might not be a very fair comparison because Aberdeen is a smaller system, so they have different kind of cost structures than town of Cary would. These are the comparison groups that you can select. I'm just going to stick to the all utilities for now. And let's go back to the example utility. So this example utility, they're charging $26.18. How does that compare to all these other utilities that we're showing, which is 447 water rate structures right now? This dial shows you that comparison. So there's your $26.18. What you're seeing here are bands of colors, greens and yellows. This middle dark green area shows you the middle 50% of all of these utilities on the map. If you change the map, if you change the comparison group, the green areas will reflect the new group that you're comparing to. If you're in that middle dark green area, you're charging similar to the middle half of the utilities of that particular comparison group. If you're in this lower yellow area, it's hard to see maybe through the webinar, but on the screen you'll be able to see it's a light yellow area right here. That's the lowest 10% of the utilities. So 10% of these utilities are charging in this yellow area. And then this high yellow area is the highest 10%. So if your utility is charging in that high yellow area, you're charging more than 90% of the utilities that you're comparing yourself to. So this gives you an idea of what the comparability of your rates are. And that was something that was mentioned in the poll question as something that's important, to be able to compare your rates to other utilities. As you change the comparison group, you might look different. So let's go back to Aberdeen real quick. So Aberdeen looks like they have, might not be a good example because they might be low on everything, but right now they show that they're charging low relative to all these other utilities, and if they select just the utilities of the same size, they're still showing that they're low on the low side. That might be a bad example. Hopefully some of the examples that we're getting will reflect a variation. Okay, so that's what the bill comparison dial does. Now we've also added 3 other dials. The cost recovery dial is the ratio of your total operating revenues divided by your total operating expenses, which includes depreciation. So you want a ratio higher than 1.0, which means that in fiscal year 2016, which is the last year that we had data, you wanted to have to have operating revenues higher than your O&M expenses and depreciation. Depreciation is not really something that you budget for typically. Some utilities do budget for depreciation, but not all utilities budget for depreciation. But it could be seen as a surrogate for future capital costs, because theoretically, if your equipment, if your assets are depreciating by certain amounts, you should be charging enough, you should be generating enough revenues to come in to replenish that amount, so that when the asset depletes and you need to replace it, you'll have generated enough revenue to pay for the purchase price, the original purchase price of that asset, so that you can replace it going forward. Now, we've done a separate webinar that focused entirely on the question of depreciation. If you go to efcnetwork.org, you can search for depreciation webinar and you can see it. We talk a lot about depreciation there, and you know, the do's and don'ts about using depreciation as a way to charge for capital. I won't get into it too much, but if you have any questions, please post it in here and we can get back to it in the Q&A session. But I just want to point out that you want to be above 1.0, and typically you want to be even higher than 1.0, because future capital costs will be higher than previous capital costs. So we're depreciating on old numbers, on old purchase prices. If you replace that asset 5 years from now or 10 years from now, the cost of capital or the cost to replace that asset in the future will be higher than the original purchase price that you paid as being depreciated. So that's why we show a little bit of a yellow area here, and then we start the green area above, I think 1.2, but don't take that 1.2 as a significant threshold. It's just there as a reminder that even if you're close to 1.0, it might not be enough to pay for all of your capital expenses in the future. We also show the affordability measure. So again, taking this bill and multiplying by 12 months and looking at the median household income for the community and dividing it together. This community is charging $26.18 per month for water, and which equates to about 1% of the median household income. So if everybody in the community was using 5,000 gallons a month, and everybody was paying this much every single month, half of the households would be paying more than 1% of their income on water bills. Whether that's affordable or unaffordable is completely up to you and to your board to decide. These green and yellow and red areas are not really based off of any national guidelines or even state guidelines as far as what they're defining as affordable. Division of Water Infrastructure and other funding programs have thresholds for affordability. This percent MHI. You might hear of 0.75% or a sliding scale. Those scales, those numbers are there to help make sure that utilities are charging high enough rates that they warrant a need to ask for subsidized funding. It's not there as an indication from the state that anything below 1.5% MHI is quote-unquote affordable, but anything 1.51% and higher is unaffordable. That's not how the state is using it. You can design, you can set your own affordability thresholds. Right now you can't change the colors, but we are working on that. So for a future dashboard, we'll be able to give you the ability to change these colors and have your own targets for what affordable means to you. The last dial here is the conservation signal dial, and it's just the dollars per 1,000 gallons that you're charging above 10,000 gallons. So it's the price that you're setting, the marginal price that you're setting at 10,000. So this utility is charging $2.73 per 1,000 above 10,000, which is in the lowest quadrant. So we have 4 different colors. These are based on the quadrants of these utilities here. So the lowest 25%, the middle 25 to 50%, and then the highest 25%. Taking these 3 things together, you can build a picture. You can start understanding the rates and financial picture all combined in one snapshot, as opposed to having to look through a bunch of different graphs. So I'm going to go and look through the questions and see who's volunteered to look at their rates. And right now we've got, let me pull up Mount Gilead. Thank you. If anybody else wants to volunteer, please feel free. And let's pull up all utilities. So what we have for Mount Gilead in January 2017, water bills at 5,000 gallons was $40.30. compared to all other utilities in the database, that's in the middle 50%. It's on the higher side, so it's more than half the utilities are charging, but it's in the middle 50%. So they're comparable to a lot of utilities. If they look at just similar size utilities, again, they're in the middle of 50%, slightly more than other utilities of the same size. Just curious if we change that to anything else, if anything changes. Let's look at neighboring systems, which we know that sometimes governing boards like to look at. How do we compare to other utilities nearby? And maybe 50 miles is too wide. Maybe you want to look at 25 miles. Again, it's in the same range. So that's generally where the rates are right now. They're in the middle of 50%. Let's change that to sewer bill. Still in the middle of 50%. So the water and sewer bill combined, again, it's in the middle of 50%. Higher than most, but not more than 75%. Looking at the cost recovery dial, we see that the ratio is less than 1.0. It's actually 0.76, which means that if you click on any of these help questions, you'll get a pop-up with a lot more information. So you can read about each of these indicators. But this means that in fiscal year 2016, the total operating expenses, which includes depreciation, exceeded total operating revenues. Operating revenues only covered 76% of operating expenses. If you click on here, you can see the actual numbers. So fiscal year 2016, what was reported to the Local Government Commission was that operating revenues was $862,000, and the operating expenses was 1.1, including depreciation, was 1.1 million. Now, you could be balancing your budget. I can't tell right now because I don't have the depreciation number in front of me right now. You could be balancing your budget. You might be able to pay for your O&M costs and maybe your debt service if you have debt service, but it does not mean that it shows that you're not generating enough revenues to pay for depreciation as well, which if you do use that as a surrogate for future capital costs, then there might not be enough. So it's an indication that these may be low rates, even though you're in that middle 50%. On the affordability side, that $82.71 per thousand for a combined water and sewer bill is about 3% MHI, 3.1%. So half of the community is paying, if they're all using the same volume water, 5,000 gallons, they're spending more than 3% of their income on water and wastewater services. We're showing it in the red, but again, these green and red areas don't really indicate specific thresholds. They're really there to kind of show that anything on the low side is more affordable than anything on the high side. So in this case, looking at this, I would say I need a little bit more information to be able to offer advice, because if this financial indicator is indicating that the revenues were not enough to pay for operations and maintenance and maybe debt service and future capital costs, if you're not generating enough revenue to pay for current and future capital costs, if that's what this is indicating, then you already have relatively high rates, but you still have some room to grow, and the affordability is going to become an issue though. You could generate more. You can look at this, look at the effect of raising rates by sliding the slider up. So you can raise rates by anything up to 100%. Let's say we raise your rates by, let's go bold, let's go 20% or 21%. So you can see the significant increase in the bill and the increase on the affordability side, but it actually did not make much of a dent on the cost recovery. So that, I think that to me indicates that the depreciation seems to be relatively high. So let's dig deeper then. We have this tab right here that shows multiple financial benchmarks. And this is all coming from the financial statements that you have. So everybody can calculate all of these indicators. And green in general would be positive, would be a good thing. Red would be a bad thing. At least red would be something to avoid. And then if you're in the greens, then you're generally doing fine. So in fiscal year 2016, what we see from the Utility Enterprise Fund is that this is the same operating ratio that you saw in the previous dial, that 76% of operating expenses are covered by operating revenues. Removing the depreciation number, you come up with this indicator, what we're calling operating revenues divided by operating expenditures. So we exclude depreciation, but with the same kind of ratio. And the revenues were enough to pay for operating expenses minus depreciation. So it's enough to pay for O&M costs. And if you click on this, you can see all the numbers. So the depreciation number is about nearly $500,000, which explains why this number here is very, very low. So these two combined tell me that your revenues were enough to pay for your O&M day-to-day expenses, that you may have a lot of assets that have high values right now that are appreciating very quickly, or that have high depreciation values. Whether or not the depreciation values mean that's how much you need to be saving going forward is a question for you to kind of investigate. And we can talk about that offline as well. Debt service coverage ratio is a key indicator as well. This one looks at the difference between your operating revenues and your O&M expenses. So it's basically this thing, but instead of looking at the ratio, we're just subtracting O&M expenses from your operating revenues. And then we divide it by your principal and interest payments. You want to have a ratio more than 1. Actually, you probably need to have a ratio more than 1.2 or 1.25, because your bond covenants or your funding agencies will tell you, we want to see you achieve a debt service coverage ratio of 1.2 or 1.25 or higher, because they want to have that security to be able to pay back the principal interest on their loans. Mountain Lead is doing great. The total ratio was 2.40, which means that it has, when you take out operating O&M costs, when you pay your day-to-day costs from your operating revenues, the rest of the operating revenues were enough to pay for principal interest payments 2.5 times over. So you can see all the numbers here. Their principal interest payments were not very significant, so you don't have a lot of debt, which is probably a good thing in this case. Quick ratio and days cash on hand are two different indicators that measure liquidity of your enterprise funds. And you can see that days cash on hand I prefer over quick ratio. It looks at the unrestricted cash that you have in the enterprise fund, which for this utility was about a little bit less than $1 million of unrestricted cash and investments, and dividing that by an average daily O&M cost. So it tells you that this utility had nearly 500 days worth of cash on hand, which means that assuming no revenue come into the utility, there's enough unrestricted cash sitting in the enterprise fund to be able to pay for 500 days or 498 days of O&M costs. So you can keep operating without paying anything for principal interest or capital costs, but you can keep paying salaries and keep buying your chemicals for another 500 days before you deplete your unrestricted cash. So that's a very good, very strong level of liquidity. Then we have debt to equity ratio, and as we saw earlier, you don't have a lot of debt. You only need 20% in debt. And on the asset depreciation, we look at how much of your assets have already depreciated. We look at your depreciation value or your depreciable asset value and look at how much is already depreciated or accumulated depreciation. 26% of the assets that are depreciable have already depreciated. Another 74% have not yet depreciated. So that means that you have enough, or that your assets, at least on the financial side, look like they're relatively new. You have 3/4 of the life of your assets still available. If you're a utility that you find that you're closer to that 50% or you're at 70% depreciation, then that might indicate that you need to be replacing a lot of your assets. They've already depreciated, at least in terms of financial sense, they've depreciated their values. We have time for maybe one more example. Let me pull up the next one that volunteered, and that looks like, let's pull up Hillsborough real quick. And let's slide this back to 0. So for Hillsborough, and let's look at all utilities. Okay, Hillsborough is a little different picture. So for water and wastewater combined at 5,000 gallons, which I don't know if that's the average consumption or not, you're charging close to that top 10%. So you're at that 90th percentile or so. Relative to other utilities of similar size, you're actually in that top 10%. So you're charging more than 90% of these 73 utilities that you're comparing to of the same size. So relatively high rates. I'm curious to see if it's the sewer or the water bill that's charging higher. So the sewer bill is in that light green area, and the water bill is up here. So it's really the sewer bill that's really pushing, that's relatively high to everybody else. The water bill was kind of within the range of other utilities. So the rates are high, but in terms of affordability, it's not that, I mean, it's 2.5%, so it's not a significant amount. It's actually right at the state median. Didn't we? I think we said the state median is about 2.47 or 2.49. So you're right at the state median. You're charging just about the same as half of the utilities in the state in terms of percent MHI. So the affordability are kind of in line with a lot of utilities. And then the cost recovery was a strong indicator. Your operating revenues exceed your operating expenses significantly. And if you look at the financial benchmarks, seeing green in a lot of things. The only things that were not green was the quick ratio. Really, the quick ratio, anything above 1.0 is good. Anything above 2 is much better. Anything above 3 is fantastic. So even though it's in the yellow, it's still a very good sign. So you can see that financially in fiscal year 2016, Hillsborough did great. And, you know, partially probably because they were charging enough rates to be able to generate the revenue that they need. I want to show an example here that is, it's a made-up example, but it's actually made up because it was, it's made up of an older system from older rates. But this is an example that we actually saw in real life in North Carolina. And this was a utility from a few years ago that was charging for water at 5,000 gallons, $12.12 per month, which is very, very low relative to other utilities, which by itself looks great for a governing board. They're happy that they're charging lower than everybody else. But if you look at their cost recovery dial, their operating ratio is really low. It's 0.54. And if you look at all the other financial benchmarks, they were in the reds for the vast majority. They didn't have any debt, but they were in the reds in the vast majority of other indicators. So that changes the picture. And that $12 no longer looks like a good thing that you're charging low. It looks like it's a bad thing that you're charging so low that you're affecting the financial performance of your utility. So the question might be, well, what happens if we raise rates? Can we raise rates? And looking at the affordability picture, they had a lot of room to grow because right now they're only charging 0.54% of the median household income. If they raise rates by 50%, it barely makes a dent on the bill. It does significantly improve, but not enough, the financial ratio, and the affordability is not affected so much. So you can do these assessments yourself, looking at your data. Again, the dashboard is already posted online, so you can take a look at it and feel free to contact me if you have any questions. We do have another couple of other tabs right here, and if we go to, let's go back to Hillsborough real quick. It will show you, the characteristics tab will show you some information, and you can compare yourself, your utilities information relative to other utilities based on the same kind of comparison groups or based on statewide stats. So it gives you an idea of how your socioeconomic conditions look different than the rest of the states. And then we have a lot of links over here for more assistance or help or more information. So I'll go back to the slides now, and let's quickly go through some of the resources available for utilities. So this is now venturing into the unknown, so we can answer some questions. We have a web page. It has the dashboard, the rates tables, and a lot more information. And some of you have posted questions about impact fees because that's changed in North Carolina since August, since the North Carolina Supreme Court ruling against impact fees in Carthage. This webinar was not meant to talk about impact fees, but we have recorded another webinar. If we go back to that web page that was linked, if you come to this web page, you'll find the dashboard on the left. You'll find some tools available to help you. You'll find the reports and tables will be posted. Actually, it looks like the report just got posted right now on the left here. If you scroll down, you'll see a recorded webinar on impact fees in North Carolina. This was posted by Jeff Hughes and Kara Malonzi from the School of Government, answering questions about how the Supreme Court's ruling affects municipal and county authority to charge impact fees. So I highly recommend you watching this video if you have questions about that. We have a lot of other resources available on our website. You can always contact us. Of course, we're part of the School of Government, so we can answer questions. On that same website, webpage, we have a lot of information, but on the website, you'll find other links to tools, decision-making tools. So we have tools that help systems look at the rates and make projections going forward on what the rates and costs will be. So you can help you with rate setting during budget season. We have tools that talk about designing rate structures that support your objectives. So if you're trying to encourage conservation, how do you set rate structures to do that? If you're trying to improve, revenue stability, how do you change the balance between base charges and volumetric rates to achieve that? If you're concerned about affordability, what do you do to address that? We have other tools that help you assess the residential affordability beyond the percent MHI indicators that you see on the dashboard. There are a lot of problems with percent MHI, so there's a different tool, and I'll show you a slide on that, that helps you assess affordability in different metrics. You can also go to Local Government Commission for assistance. They have a fiscal analysis dashboard that's really useful, that looks similar to ours, but it's serving different purposes, and they don't have rates information included. Or you can use any of the resources available to you from AWWA or the North Carolina chapter or Rural Water Association, CERCAP, the League of Municipalities, Association of County Commissioners, and the COG. So there's a lot of people, a lot of technical assistance providers available to help answer questions. We're available to help with water systems directly, free of charge, because we're paid for, our services are paid for through EPA. And this is a link to a webpage that has a combination or a whole list of financial financial tools that will help you as you set rates or as you assess things, including assessing revenue risks or assessing the rates. We have, I think, about 12 or 13 different tools listed on here. The PowerPoint slides have links and have information about each of these tools. I won't go over all of them, but I will mention the Residential Rates Affordability Assessment tool again. This is the tool to use if you're concerned about affordability, and it helps you look at affordability from a range of metrics as opposed to just percent MHI. Last thing I'll mention is that we have a blog that we like to keep up to date once a week, and we post a lot of things that are relevant for North Carolina, relevant for water and wastewater utilities. If you're interested in signing up, please let us know. We're happy to do that, or you can go to the web page itself and sign up from there. But right now, I think that I'll end by saying that we can provide direct assistance for small water systems, and we are, I think, ready to take some questions. I'm sorry I went a little bit over, but I can stay on for another 5-10 minutes. Happy to answer some questions.
All right, so Shadi, we did get one question, and an attendee asked, how does their utility review their survey information to ensure it is up to date, especially regarding CIP and any updated rates that occur?
Okay, good question. So we do the dashboard and we do the survey once a year, and we typically ask for the rate sheets in the fall, asking for the January rates. So in this October, November, we'll be contacting utilities asking if you have rates, or if you know that your rates are going to be different, or they have been different since last January, let us know what your January 2018 rates will be. So we contact utilities directly. We request that information. We get the rate sheets, we put into the database, and we update the dashboards typically in February or March. So we do this once a year. If your rates change between now and then, let's say you raise your rates in July, which is what most utilities do, and you want to change that on the dashboard, we don't have the resources available to be able to update that. You can't go into the database or into the dashboard and change rates yourself directly. But what you can do is, well, first of all, you can always click on here and email us. If you click on this email feedback or comments, you can send us your new rate sheets, but we'll probably have to reserve it for the next update of the dashboard. Or you can go in and say, all right, my rates have changed. I'm Hillsborough, but my rates have changed. Click on this edit data, and you'll see a create new utility or clone utility Hillsborough. It's probably easier just to clone your own utility and give it a new name. So Hillsborough new rates, and then change your rates. So if your rates went up from $40.50 to $52.40, so you added $2. Change your rates information, change your median household income, change whatever information you want to change, and hit save. And what you'll see is a new rate structure being generated where you can kind of look at your new rates relative to everybody else's January 2017 rates. So you're not changing anybody else's rates, you're just changing yours. This does not change the rates in our database. This just saves it on your computer. So it really creates a cookie on your computer so that it will recognize your computer and say, oh, you created this thing that's called Hillsborough New Rates, so you can look at it. But if you clear your cache or you delete your cookies, then you might lose this one. It doesn't affect our database directly, but hopefully we can keep this up to date in February, March. We aim for February, March because that's around the beginning of the budget season.
Thank you, Shadi. So I do think at this point we are out of time for any further questions. Shadi and Chris will be following up with you offline via email. And quickly before we wrap up, I just have two more quick polling questions. And the first polling question is if you are interested in subscribing to the Environmental Finance Center blog. If you want to sign up for the blog but don't have the opportunity to submit your polling answer today, you can sign up for the blog on the efcnetwork.org website. And getting ready to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And the last poll question is if you are a small water system of 10,000 or fewer people served, are you interested in receiving in-depth technical assistance? And if you're unsure about technical assistance or do not have the opportunity to submit your polling answer today, you can review the technical assistance form on the efcnetwork.org website. And getting ready to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. And lastly, there is in the chat box a survey link being sent out to all of you. This survey link will be in the follow-up email, but if you could just take a few minutes to let us know how you felt about today's webinar. And lastly, I just wanted to thank Shadi and Chris for the in-depth look at the North Carolina dashboard and North Carolina rates, and thank all the attendees that have joined us today for all of your questions and offering your utility to be an example. Shadi and Chris, would you have anything that you would like to add additionally before we end the webinar?
I have one last quick thing to add. One of the resources that I did not mention, I know that this was a question that was submitted when people were registered. It's a question about communicating with the boards and how do you make a positive rate case? How do you explain to the board, how do you get the board to understand that you need to have a rate case? We have a web page that has a lot of research. We did some research into that. If you go to our website and you search for rate approval, process communication strategy and toolkit, or you just search for rate case, rate approval, rate case, it should come up with this web page. It explains the project that we did. It has a video that you can watch. But there are a lot of publications and tools that are available here that help water systems make the case, and including a visualization tool that helps the utilities make a case for raising rates. So we did a separate project that looked at that. So that's a resource that's available for utilities. I know you're all gearing up to talk to your boards, so I just wanted to mention that tool. So that's it from me. I want to thank everybody, and we will get back to people who have not had their questions submitted that were submitted in the registration form answered. We will be following up with you. Chris, do you have anything else?
No, nothing more for me. Obviously, thanks a lot to Shadi for sharing so much great information today, and thank you all for joining us. And if you have any questions about anything rates related, legislative related, league research related, feel free to give me a call or email at any time.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.